we're back for another podcast. What are
Yes.
we talking about today? Talking about
Uh,
loads of things, probably.
yes.
Our experiences, because we seem to be very similar in many in our physical disability. Yeah, I suppose that's the best way of phrasing it. It's what it would be traditionally phrased as.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess for context, John, physical disabilities. What are your physical disabilities that we're going to be discussing?
The physical disability that we're going to be discussing is probably the fact that I am that is a horrible physical
Yeah.
disability.
Yeah. Yes. Right. We're
I,
professional podcasters. Remember, PPs.
I love how that's multiple years down the line now, and you still make that joke.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I am uh partially sighted or blind in my left eye, and recently am going deaf in my right ear, which the irony of that is not lost on me.
Hmm. Yeah. And for people that can't grasp the context, if you're blind in one eye, obviously you then favor the good side. But John is losing his hearing in said good side.
Yeah, so that means half the time I'm kind of leaning to the left or to the right, trying to hear and see.
You probably get a bit of a neck pain, and you're like,
I do, yeah, yeah, yeah. It does hurt, that's for sure.
yes. And then I, on the other hand, was born. I wasn't born half deaf, but I've grown up half deaf, and I lost my eyesight, so I'm now visually impaired in my right eye. So deaf in right ear, blind in right eye, and I lost my eyesight in 2020, early 2020, so about 4 years. Um, but me, it's just my right side. John, it's split right and left. But I started with the deafness and went blind. John started with the blindness and went deaf.
Great.
Yeah. Yes, but what I think firstly that's most interesting to me about this is I never classed myself. I
And I never classed myself as blind. It was always, I mean, I am medically, but it was one of the things that never really came up. It was, yeah, I can't see out of this eye. Yeah, I'm gonna bump into things. But it was just a thing.
yeah.
It was never a a big deal. But it is a big deal for many people who are fully sighted and fully hearing. It's like, oh wow, how do you cope? I'm like, because I don't have a fucking choice. Like I have a choice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I cope, otherwise I'm dead.
Yes, and I had the exact same experience when I was younger with my hearing. It's like, oh, you're half deaf. How do you manage? I'm like, I sit on the right side. I push everyone to my left side. Like, or I just don't hear and then get told off for not hearing or not paying attention. No, I just didn't hear you. Yeah, but I never thought about being disabled or half deaf. Like, no. The only reason I started thinking about it is because when I lost my sight, I was like, oh, I'm now visually impaired. But the doctor was saying, well, yeah, but you're also hearing impaired. I was like, point. That's a good point. I'm now half blind and half deaf. Right, yeah. I should probably say I'm disabled.
I should probably say I'm disabled. That
That,
that I was that on purpose.
yes.
I thought it was because it's the same thing. For me, I didn't class myself as disabled. Even when I got the diagnosis of autistic, I didn't class myself as disabled. I didn't view myself as someone with a disability. It is a disability, sure. Okay, it's just one more to add to my list. That sounds horrifically flippant. But yes, life is tough until my minières. And when that started, because that gives me, for people who don't know, I get fatigued very quickly and very easily. I am constantly dizzy, so walking around can mean I can just fall over out of nowhere. I get very nasty ass tinnitus, which can and it feels like literally my hearing feels like I'm underwater the entire time, on this ear. And then there are sharp pains, and they just come on out of nowhere, which can make me dizzy, which is great when I have one eye that functions, which is already under a lot of pressure, according
Hmm.
to. So then the hearing plays up, and so both are under. It's great. My
Yeah.
poor body.
Yeah, the reason I say I should I should probably call myself disabled is it's not because of the disabled label, because I was already disabled because of my hearing.
Mm,
It's because there was a shift in my experiences in the world, and it felt that I was unable to do what I could do previously.
mm,
And that I think that to me is where the difference lies.
mm.
When I was born half deaf, so I've never had the ability to hear, so I've never lost anything. But with
Yeah.
my eyesight, I feel like I've lost something. So I
Hmm.
now feel disabled.
Mm.
That to me is a difference in my own experience and feeling of the label. I still don't class myself like, yes, I am disabled, but I wouldn't go around saying, "Hi, I'm disabled." Like, no, I'm half blind, half deaf, but I'm not disabled. I think they're different things. I think disabled is a label used to categorize an average of people in certain scenarios, which half blind, half deaf is a description of my action capabilities.
Yeah. Pretty much the same. Interesting then. So I've always seen autism as a categorization of my action capabilities, but then when I think about that for a little bit longer, I'm like, oh, is it? Is it? Because the definitions of autism are a little bit more solid than ADHD, but not.
I would still describe them as action capabilities because
Because
it's field of
yeah,
affordances.
yeah. Mm,
Yeah. Like you say, disability is a social construct that we've created to help classify an average of people.
mm,
And
yeah,
an average of people with ASD will behave in ways more like
yeah. Because
XYZ.
you look at the ADHD, the autism spectrum, and you see the kind of differences in everyone. But these are the things that we struggle with. Some struggle more, some struggle less, some but yes, these are our action cap. Yeah, yeah, that
Mm.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm having an interesting dilemma with
Ooh.
myself, but also the individual that I'm coaching, trampoline to, is if I do compete, do I compete in the disability category? There,
Oh.
there are two disability categories, D1 and D2,
Hmm.
obviously depending on the severity of the disability. Now, I've always been able to compete in the disability category because my now with my sight, I have the choice again. Do I go to the disability category? Because I'm half blind, half deaf. Those that are competing in my category, so my category would be 19 plus male. In League Two, probably if I go to National League, like none of those are going to be half blind, half deaf. I don't think, anyway. So do I compete there, or do I compete in the disability category, where the disabilities are far ranging? When I
Mm.
look at the results and the scores, I don't think it'd be fair to me for me to compete in the disability category because my score, sorry for those in those categories, would trounce them. Like I would demolish. Like in football, it'd be like a 20-0 win. Like there is literally no point. So I'm like, do I go in the category that I should in the disability category, or do I go in the mainstream able body category, but then not be right at the top? Because I still struggle. Like I still have needs that are different from theirs. I don't know. And the girl that I'm coaching is profoundly deaf, but she was born profoundly deaf, and arguably she should be in the disability category. But looking at how quickly she's developing her skills, I don't think she would be that out of place in mainstream trampoline groups. No, she's not going to be winning, but maybe in the future she might. So I'm like, okay, is the disability category actually helping in these contexts? Question for you.
Oh, that
If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you go in the disability category or the mainstream category?
I'm not sure because
It's almost a certain win and certain qualification into like the higher levels of trampoline in the disability category because my scores are they're good for that classification of performance.
hmm,
But in mainstream trampoline, I got no chance in my age group at least.
I mean, what is your goal?
Actually, that's what it comes down to. I mean,
Mm.
I don't actually want to compete, so it's sort of a null and void question.
Yeah.
But if I was to compete, I don't know. And the reason I'm
If you
exploring this question
okay,
is because of her. It's like
mm.
putting myself in her shoes, where would I want to be? I don't know. Because if she asked me, where do you think I should compete? Now I'm stuck here again. Because I know when I was younger, I didn't want to be seen as disabled. I didn't want to have a hearing aid. I didn't want to have a cochlear implant or anything like that for my hearing. Like, no, thank you. And I'm hearing anyway because obviously I've got my left side. So I am fine, but I didn't want to be seen as disabled. So
Mm.
competing in the disability category seems like, for me, seems to go against the idea of seeming normal, mainstream.
Eh.
Yeah, like when people look at me, I look normal. They wouldn't know that I'm half blind, half deaf, or that I've
Mm.
struggled with all of the things in the past. Like they wouldn't know any of that. And they don't need to know any of that. Where are you leaning? Are you like a 60-40, 70 or
Yeah, I'm kind of like, hmm, because there is a piece that is like, yeah, I mean, if you are disabled and you're happy to be there, then sure. But equally, because of invisible disabilities, it's tough because then you've also got the societal pressure of being in, and if that's the big thing. It's like, oh, this person has scored X on this and they shouldn't be in this category. And if they were in this category, if they were in the other category, then they wouldn't get as high, but they've won because they're so not actually disabled, except they are,
yeah.
except I am. So shut up. How do you define disabled then? Someone who's incapable of doing anything, is not able to do a thing? Great. So you're not, and that is it, like not infantiling them. It is literally just saying you have to be basically unable to function to be classed as disabled, which is kind of a bit gross and very ableist and yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one. It is down to the perception of the individual, which, oh, what a surprise, that shocks everyone. Like, what I think I would actually pass that question back if I was
But
in
yeah,
your
but
shoes. Like,
your situation, like if you were,
hmm,
if for in some miracle world, some parallel universe, you decide I'm going to start trampolining at Accelerate Trampoline, and a year down the line they say, hey, do you want to go to a competition? And you're like, yeah, I wouldn't mind competing. Do you want to be in the disability category or mainstream category?
I think it would depend on how much I felt my disability affected my ability to perform. Brilliant.
And you're half blind, so depth perception is buggered.
Is yes.
It's very difficult. The only reason I can still do my skills is because I learned the skills before I went half blind. But still, I get lost in those skills.
But then again, I would have learnt those skills from being half blind, and so I would have had to have adjusted what I was doing to do that
Actually, yeah, so it
anyway.
might actually be easier for you because you don't lose the skill.
No, I have not lost anything. I never bloody had it.
Mm.
But in it, I've had constant conversations with people. It's like, what's it like? I'm like, I don't fucking know because I don't know your experience. What's it like having two eyes?
Well,
Like,
yeah, I actually
I
say that.
like,
I say that about my ears, not my eyes, because obviously I know two eyes. But yeah,
but like, what's it like having two eyes? Which I think is in many ways having it and losing it as well. Because like, I rely heavily on my hearing because of my sight, which is great.
well, I
But
used to rely heavily on my sight. Like
because of your
I
hearing,
had
yeah.
to lip read.
Mm,
And obviously losing one eye, depth perception went, and it was really bad until I got used to only having one eye. So I was struggling to lip read anyone, so I couldn't understand anyone. Communication was difficult, and
yeah.
it is still difficult. I'm not gonna like say, oh yeah, communication is easy, and I can just lip read everyone across the room. No, I sort of figure it out. I can work it out now again, but it's a
Yeah.
again I've had to adapt. So you're getting out this question. Where are you leaning? It could literally be like a 51-49 split.
It's actually a dead center 50-50. Like I there is not, I think I would base it on my score,
Yeah,
the score that I would get.
I'm the same.
If it feels out of alignment with the rest of the group and I would just sail through it, it would also depend, like, here are the assumptions I'm basing my decision on, because that's actually probably more useful than just saying which one. Like, I am I like to push myself. I am very driven in that way and I always want to improve. if I'm at the top of my game and I'm the number one in the disability group, then I'm just, there's not enough. It's like, okay, cool, I can just chill now because I will always win, which would suck.
Yep.
And that would be the only reason I do competition. It would be to push myself, to push my skills, etc., etc. So there would be no real point. But then would I feel comfortable with being with perhaps never having an opportunity to win?
Yeah.
Maybe be. It would be very frustrating because I would reach a point where my sight and hearing will I will
It would be a
meet my actual
significant,
limits.
yeah,
I
significant
it will
impairment.
now be unable to go any further, which would be frustrating. I would hit a ceiling that I have hit.
I don't know actually,
No?
because it's a physical sport. I don't think you'd hit a ceiling. I think you'd, like me, probably slow down in the speed at which you can learn the skills. But I mean, you're an adult, so
Maybe.
um, obviously all the other stuff is in there. But yeah, I'm the same. I'm thinking less about my disability and
Mm,
more about my ability, my skill level
mm,
in comparison with the others that I'd be competing against.
yeah.
And that I think is the most interesting part of this conversation, which is where I hoped it went to. Because in trampoline competitions, as I mentioned, you've got League One, League Two, League Three. So League Three is where you start and you go up to League One being the best, well, best out of those three. And then you go to Super League, right? Super League is like the best of the best in National League. Some people that could be in League Two compete in League Three. So they win League Three instead of come like mid-table League Two. And obviously you get that in League Two and League One. So some people compete in League Two when they should be in League One. But you also get some people in League Two that shouldn't really be in League Two, but they just hit the criteria. Like they've just hit the criteria to get to League Two, so they're in League Two, but they're right down the bottom. Or they could be like mid to top table League Three. And I think it's interesting when I look at the choice of the individual, looking at their ability and what their score is likely to be, and going, right, I could win that group or come mid-table this group. I'm going to choose to win. Or I could come mid-table that group or bottom of that group. I'm going to go bottom because I want to push myself. I find that far more interesting than who won the category.
Mm,
Because sometimes when I see the names at the top of the list, I'm like, oh, they got gold again. Yeah, well, they should be a League Two anyway. So I just shrug it off. It's like, yeah, whatever. Oh, it's one, two,
yeah.
three. Yeah, whatever.
Congratulations. Well done.
Yeah. So
This
well
is
done for beating everyone you should have beaten. And you can tell as well by the scores.
it's kind of like I think we were talking about this yesterday
Hmm.
when we were talking about kind of like over yesterday or another day. Who knows anymore? Because time construct. Yeah.
Fun.
We kind of talking about like the how we would measure it and all of that. Those like, and I've lost my train of thought, so I'll find it in a minute. You can keep.
We're talking about the performance and how well someone competes in comparison with scores, scoring each other. Actually, I guess while you're trying to remember what it is that you're talking about, what I was thinking about before we started this conversation, I thought I might bring up is we mentioned last week about load management, managing effort, etc. When in strength and conditioning, someone goes into a gym, normally, depending again on who's running it, the level of the practitioner and the performance, etc., but you do some sort of fatigue measure. And the easiest fatigue measure that I know of to use is a maximum counter movement jump, CMJ. Basically, hands on hips, stand on floor, jump really high. Can you jump high? Right? And it's a fatigue measure because it's maximum, so it's maximum height jump. And if you're fatigued, your maximum is obviously going to be lower than your maximum. And if it's a certain percentage lower than your maximum, well, now you're a certain percentage fatigued. You match that up with an RPE scale, rate of perceived exertion scale, and now you know within 30 seconds how fatigued an individual feels and physiologically is likely, which means you can tailor the session for that. So when someone turns up, instead of going, we're going to do a really hard session today, they do the fatigue measure and you go, you're really tired. We're not going to work really hard today. Or you're feeling pretty good. We're going to work really hard today. Now, I don't know of a trampoline club that does that, but I haven't been to some of the high performance clubs, so maybe they have a fatigue metric in there. Where I think this could be interesting to other people is I have a fatigue metric throughout the day. It's my RPE scale. That's what I use. So when I'm about to start a session,
When you say RPE scale, like, is that, how did you create that? How did you find, like, is that a default thing that just exists and you measure it against this thing that exists? Like, how do you, because that really interests me, because I'm thinking about my own kind of productivity, and often it's focused on the tasks that I've completed or the things that I've done, but actually it's how much energy is expended and what, and I don't have anything to compare it to because some days I have higher fatigue because of stuff. And so that means I've only done two tasks versus yesterday when I had lots of energy and I wasn't struggling
mm,
when I've done 15 tasks, but 15 down to two sounds awful. But then you add in things like RP, because that's the thing that I find fascinating. And I'm also thinking from a client perspective, that is such a nice measurement, because often most of my clients suffer with fatigue. And so measuring that is kind of awesome. So I really want to hear more about, because you mentioned your RPE scale. I'm like, okay, cool. What the hell? How?
I know we've discussed load measurement before because you look at a max and the
Mm,
max being a 10. So
yeah.
you do your max session, say you want to do an hour of writing.
Mhm.
You write for an hour, that's a 10, that's a max. I've done all the work I could possibly do, and I'm physically, mentally drained, cannot do this anymore. That's a 10. So 10 out of 10, you're done. Then what I do is I try and remember those sorts of maxes and then go, "Oh, okay, I want to be working at a 7." And it's a feeling. I want to be working at a 7.
Mm,
Now, in the gym, RPE is normally associated with reps. So, like 1 rep max or a 3 rep max. So, if your 1 rep max, let's use easy numbers, is 100 kilograms,
mm,
1 rep max is 100. If you're doing an 8 RPE, then it would feel like you can do 2 more reps. So, you
okay.
do 1 rep at maybe 90 kilos, but you feel like you could have done 2 more. If it was a 7 RPE, you feel like you could have done 3 more. If it's a
And
nine,
it is very much a feeling. It's very much a sense of like, this is what that is.
yeah,
And that gives that flexibility and variability of like, because some days it feels like a seven when the day before you did the exact same thing and it was actually a five, so to speak.
exactly.
And
So
that's where that's how that becomes really helpful from, the what gets measured gets managed idea because it's a variable scale. It's not,
it's a relative scale.
it's a relative scale. So it's
Mm,
relative to the day. It's a
yeah,
snapshot based on the moment that you're in. And so it doesn't need, because I'm just thinking, okay, so let me go do that and I'll do an hour of writing and do as much writing and just not do anything else apart from write to do the most I could in an hour sprint, and that would be my 10. And that would be, and then I'm like, oh, I want to do a seven because I want to do a seven. Oh,
mm.
but I've got to seven it correct. Like, there's me going, okay, well, that if I don't do a seven, really, I need to do a 10.
So so the 10 of the load, you've got the hour session, and
Hmm.
it's so depending on how you want to do it, I do it on word count. Word count plus ideas. Like if I'm working on one idea and like 3,000 words, that's going to be different from working on 4 ideas at 200 words each. So each of these, because I've done so much writing, I know what each of them roughly feels like for me, which obviously takes time to develop and work out how it feels. But once you've got that 10, so using one example, you've got one idea, you wrote 2,000 words in an hour, great, that's my 10. Tomorrow, I want to do some writing, but I want to be working at a 7. So that's what you'd say. I'm working at a 7. What
Mm.
the at a 7 means is a feeling. That day you might get 1,500 words, but you worked at a 7 in the
Okay.
hour. Or you got to 1,800 words, but it was still at a 7. Or you
Okay.
got 2,200 words at a 7.
Mm.
So it felt like a 7 because it felt like you could have done more, but you got more words, which meant that was a better day.
Okay.
On the other side of that, you could have got to in the hour got to 100 words, but it felt at a 9. Like not completely maxed out, but you were very drained, only getting 100 words. You obviously know you're feeling it feels draining, feels like a difficult day. Do you need to write all these numbers down? No, you can work it out. Everyone knows it. Like you go, yeah, that felt like a shit day, or that felt like a hard day. And you can look at the words or look at the ideas that you've gone through. Yeah, that was a bad day, that was a good day, etc., etc. Some people will journal this and say, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. But it's just managing how I'm feeling throughout the day. So if I know I'm starting to feel a little bit drained, I will say to myself, okay, this session, this writing session, I want to be working at an 8 or I want to be working at a 6. And
Mm,
so instead of going, I want to be working at a 10, I want to be working at a 10, I want to be working at a 10, I'm wiped out for the next day.
mm.
It's, I want to be working at an 8. And working at an 8, if you're feeling bad, is still an 8. If you're feeling good, is still an 8. Because it's relative to how you're feeling for the day. Rather than the absolute, I'm going to write 2,000 words. I'm going to write 2,000 words. I'm going to write 2,000 words. That's an absolute value that you have to stick to. But the at an 8 for a shit day might be 100 words, but you've still worked at an 8. And that to me is working relative to your rate of perceived exertion rather than absolute to the weight you need to lift in the gym or
Because
the
that's
words you need to
often
write.
what happens. Like when I talk about, oh, we've got to do all these things. I must write this. This is what the traditional productivity systemsy advice is.
Absolute load measurement, the numbers of
Absolute,
tasks
do
completed, the
this, do
words
this,
done.
do this, do this. Instead of I'm working at this, like this is my rate of perceived exertion. I am at a 7. I want to be at a 7. I want to have a little bit of space left over, but I still want to be working at it, but I still want to do that. And
Mm.
then, yeah.
Yeah. So the plan would be I want to work at an 8 here. I want to work at a 5 here. I want to work at a 7 here. I want to work at a 9 here.
Mm,
At the end of the session, you can look back and go, well, actually, it was meant to be a 7, but it felt like an 8. Or actually, it was meant to be a 7, but it felt like a 6.
mm,
And that is you understanding and educating your explanations and experience of your action capabilities, your ability to do those things. And inevitably, as you gain expertise, you might plan, oh yeah, I reckon this can be at an 8, and it was at a 5. And if that happens 2 or 3 times in a row, well, now you're thinking, oh, okay, I've developed my skill here. I am better at this thing now. Maybe I need to do another max test to recalibrate where I'm actually working at. And that's where skill improvement happens. In the gym, your max, instead of it being 100, maybe it's 110 or 120. And so now you're at 8, instead of it being an 80 kilo or a 90 kilo, it's now 100 kilo. So now your previous max was now working at an 8.
mm.
And that's how you start developing and building up your expertise. In the gym, it's numbers on the bar or the dumbbell or whatever lift you're doing. In sport, in skill, it's typically the skills you're doing, the explosiveness of the skill, the complexity of the skill. But in anything else, in writing daily life, depends what you're doing. Maybe you can only do the washing up and you can't do the drying up, because the drying up, you're like, nope, can't do that as well. Standing up hurts my back. Over
Yeah.
time, maybe you can do that. And it's applying periodization from strength and conditioning using RPE scales to everyday activities. It's high performance work in everyday people. That
Yeah.
that is what I do. That is what I try and do. I take all of the research I've done from high performance activity in sport and apply it to everyday people. That's why I use ecological psychology and ecological dynamics, which is typically used in skill acquisition for high performance sport, and bring it to everyday people.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, do you remember what you were thinking about, or is it completely gone?
No, it's completely gone.
Okay, but yeah, so that's what I wanted to discuss. A bit of periodization in there, a bit of load management in there, and a bit of fatigue measurement in there.
So I'm going to ask that question, which I know you're going to love this question, but I'm going to ask it. How do you get started with it? Do you choose a particular activity? Like, what are ways that you can get started with using our, like, in perhaps in a more,
Bring some more tangible points to that, measures to that, because say started, you've already started because you're already feeling your
yeah,
experiences.
right.
So
As
like,
in, so to start
what measures are you asking about?
actively perceiving, like having it be information that is brought further into my experience, for example. So, like, I'm starting to measure it, as in to look at it, to review it a little bit more.
If you want to measure and review it,
Hmm.
start measuring and reviewing it.
But which one do I start with? Do I have it for across the whole day? Like, what are the fractal measurements?
Of course, it depends.
I know, but I'm
Um,
asking those questions.
I mean,
So if we think about Notion, most
yeah.
of the time we start people off on one small thing
Uh-huh.
because Notion's overwhelming.
Task
Would that be,
simplification.
yeah, would we simplify it? Would it be effective if we simplify it down to be one thing that we're measuring? Or is that,
Obviously, it's going to depend. But if the person, if the person that wants to start doing it wants to go 100% do RPs on everything, then they can. But my question would be, how are you isolating the session? Like that,
mm,
that I think is the most important consideration here. In a gym, your session would be your set.
mm,
So the set and the amount of reps you're doing of that set of that exercise. In sports, same sorts of thing. Like in a trampoline, maybe it's the go on the trampoline, or it's the 1 hour session slot, or the 40-minute session slot, or the day session. Like the RPE is your feeling. Your feeling is constant because you are experiencing and hopefully
yeah,
you're alive. So
fingers crossed.
yeah. So when you do, if you do decide to measure and write something down, you need to decide when and where you measure. I
How do
personally,
you
I
decide?
personally don't write anything down,
Mhm.
but with my time blocking, I use that as a nice proxy
Ah, I see.
to
So
say
basically, your time block is almost a session that you're measuring. So it's like
that's how
session
I
one
describe it.
of the morning. It's like, oh yeah, my RPE is I want to be working at a 9 this morning, and I worked at this during this session. Yeah, cool. That I think that was the bit that I was missing of like, okay, how would I go to writing? Because I'm often doing 4 or 5 different things in my time block
Mhm.
because life. And I'm like, yeah, but I'd be quite interested to look at that from my perspective, just to start seeing it or measuring it, like I was about to say cognitively, which made me scream.
Well, yeah, it's adding an RPE value to pre and post. So pre being what you would like to be working at,
Mm,
post what it felt like.
yeah.
And yeah, I think this is one of those things. When I speak, I use words. I have meanings behind those words, and the relationships come from my expertise. So
Yes.
when we discussed this, what, 7, 8 months ago, I said I look at time blocking as my sessions from sport. To me, I related the session with all of the information that I know and expertise I have about periodization from my degree. I
I
think
don't
you
have
just,
that.
no, I think you just made that relation because we
Yeah, I do.
discussed the
Yeah.
two independently, but never
Never
together.
combine the two. Yeah, that makes sense. Because that was the bit that I was starting to like. I'm like, yeah, cool. But if I sat down and tried to do a writing one, if I was to write, but I'm only writing for like 20 minutes and then I have to go out of the room, then I have to, then Tori's talking to me or saying about food. And I'm like, so that wouldn't work because I can't do a max. But then if I'm looking at a session, like a time block of time that I'm using, I can rep max that because if I'm doing lots of different things, then I can do it that way.
Would it be useful for me to go through a day and like just talk through what a day of RP would look like?
That would be really good. Yeah.
So, because I've got Morgan, I'll have a look at my calendar. I won't do the last couple of days because I was literally just dry. Um, so, oh, I took off all my tasks, don't I? So let me just quickly show the completed tasks. So there we go, show completed tasks. So I'm looking
Because
at,
because like while you're stalling and doing that, like
I'm looking at Tuesday
I'm just
now.
thinking from a neurodiverse perspective, this stuff's nuts. Like this would be so valuable for people who have chronic illness. Like, but it's only put in high performance. It's spoken about in high performance spaces, and I'm like,
Mainly high performance sport, yeah.
yeah, and I'm like, hi, us normies could do with a little bit of that because then because it's adjusted, it is adjusted. It is just it's about us.
But
It's
it's
not
it's
about
human performance.
it's human performance. And I'm just like, why can't we have this?
Hmm.
Because if we have this, It means we can do our best, which is what we all want to do as humans. We want to do our best, but our best is variable and different. And so having something this obviously is simple. Well, it
But
sounds simple.
it it's simple when applied, but like in all high performance work, it's very complex when you look at the research.
Yeah. And so it's unattainable for most people who don't have time to research.
But how do you find out about it if you're not in sports and you're not in
Exactly.
high performance sports?
And the only reason I found out about it was because of you, because you are in there. But
Exactly.
most people wouldn't come here and go, oh, I'm going to listen to a high performance thing.
Well,
Because, like,
but what makes me laugh is some of the people with fatigue struggles, chronic fatigue illness, is they count spoons or they count forks and they do a stars of the day. That is periodization,
it
a very
is, yeah.
simplified version, but it is periodization. Right. So I'm looking at Tuesday. I wake up around 8, 8:30, depending on the day. My alarm goes off or I wake up before it. I start my day with a warm-up. That's how I describe it. It's a warm-up, which is do emails, podcasts, Twitter bookmarks, morning water, and meds. Right? That's my warm-up. I'm acting and doing things. While I'm doing that, I'm also likely doing other stuff as well, catching up on notifications on my phone.
Question. Do you
Mhm.
have that in your calendar marked as warm up? Or is that just assumed for you now? I'm just quite intrigued at like how when you first started it, did you put it in your calendar? Was it something that you were like, no, this is my warm up. This is the behavior that I want to, because that's what people
Mm.
that's my assumption would be I'll put it in my calendar because then it will give me that trigger of like, okay, this is the behavior I want to do. So let's do that behavior and have that in there. I assume you don't have that in there now.
I never had it in there as warm-up section because
Mhm.
calendars don't let you have like tasks on tasks on tasks. Like there's not that hierarchy scale. You sort of get it in Akiflow with slots, but Akiflow doesn't allow you to have all the other features in Morgan, which I like. Um, so in my Morgan, I have email, podcast, Twitter bookmarks, morning water, and prednisolone as tasks. But I know that is warm-up. Like that's how I would categorize that using an average label. Then my session one of the day, if we're going to look
Mhm.
at the hierarchy, on Tuesday the 16th was BG questions. That's the task that I put in there. Now I know what that is. That's a video.
Yeah.
Now for that video, I needed to do a little bit of research before it, and then I needed to edit it after recording it. And I needed to do all of that in a 2-hour session slot. Now, I know because of my editing that that type of edit was going to be at a 6, like an RPE at a 6, like maybe a 7, depending on what I want to do in there. So that I know is a fairly low energy activity. The research for it, however, is more likely to be at a 7, maybe at an 8. Again, depending on what I find. This is pre, right? And then the recording probably at a 4, like it's not even bothered doing an RPE for it. It's just I'm going to sit here and talk to a camera. The actual execution of it was about that because I predicted, I estimated when I'm going to call it accurately.
So in your session then, you don't it sounds like you don't actually even have the average. Like it's like a 7 for this, a 4 for this, a X for that. It
Hmm.
is you still divide it up, but it's not like tracked meticulously. It's just like I'll probably be about that, I'll probably be about that, and I'll probably be about that.
Yeah, because I know that session is going to have more than one thing.
Yeah. So
But
you do put an RPE for each thing in that session, but the constraint is that session.
the RPE is constant, remember?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true.
RPE
Okay.
is constant because it's a constant feeling, right? But I know if I was to average it out and just add some arbitrary measures just for explanation purposes, this activity is around this activity is around this activity is
Okay,
around
so you're
this.
not you're actually explaining it to me versus what you would actually do. So
Yes.
what would you actually you would be like, oh, it's about 7. This will be a 7,
Mm, yeah,
probably.
exactly.
So
So
that's how
look,
you would say that on average, that's about a 7.
yeah, so the BG questions session in the morning would be about a 7, maybe an 8.
Okay, cool.
Because some of the activities in there are like 4 or a 5, and then a sort of like a 7 and an 8. Yeah. So I'm looking at that going, I think it's about a 7 or an 8.
Cool.
Now, because I know it's about a 7 or an 8, what I've done afterwards from 11 till 12 is how I use Morgan now, which is like a multiple session from a task I did the day before, because I expected that the pre RPE for that 2 hour session slot was a 7 or an 8, but the post was actually a 9 because I came up with troubles because I forgot to turn the mic on, and I had to record it a second time, and that just, yeah, it took more energy than I expected, which meant, okay, I'm gonna have to do it tomorrow, right? So the pre was 7 or 8, I'll put it in there, but the post was, shit, I made loads of mistakes, I'm gonna have to do it another time. Which, because I predicted, again, prediction with RPE for the BG questions was 7 or 8, I should be fine to do a small session after that at about a 7 or 8. So I put it afterwards. If the BG questions was a 9, I'd move that's the other session that'd be a 7 or an 8, because if I've done a 9, I don't want to do a 7 and 8. I want to do something lower, like a 6. And me putting these numbers on it hopefully is giving you some reference points, but I'm not thinking in numbers, I'm thinking in how I'm feeling.
Yeah, so it's very much you're thinking and how you're feeling of like, oh, that was annoying, that was frustrating. I don't want to really touch that stupid damn file now.
Exactly.
Just fuck that video, go away. So that's a 9.
Exactly. It's a 9, maybe even a 10.
Yeah.
It's unlikely to be a 10 because a 10 normally wipes out the next session. A 10 is, you are completely wiped out. I need like a 2 hour rest and recovery session, right? A 9 is, oh, that was hard. I'm going to need a bit of a break now. And this is where, when I look at my day, well, so I've got the BG questions, then I got how I use Morgan Now, then I got the lunch. Now, a lunch RPE, it's not a 0 because I'm still doing things. I need to make my lunch, right? I need to make my lunch. I need to sort out stuff downstairs. If it's the washing up or the drying up from night before or morning breakfast, then I need to do the dog's meds. So I'm still doing things. So it's still a 3 or a 4. It's not a 0 because every activity has energy expenditure.
Yeah.
Right? And on some days, if I know there's a lot of washing up and drying up to do, my lunch might actually be a 5 or a 6.
Yeah.
So the evening before, if I know my dad hasn't done the washing up and drying up, I'm going to need to do that at lunchtime. So I know my lunch is actually going to be a 7 or an 8, which means I don't want to do a 7 or an 8 in my session before. So I might actually change what I'm doing. See how my feeling throughout the day, the pre-expectations of the feeling of the sessions changes what I'm actually doing in the sessions. Yeah. Hopefully these numbers are helping you.
Yes.
But yeah, so we've got the lunch, and on that day it was a 4. So that's an active recovery. My lunch is active recovery. This is terminology from periodization. So I've got my warm-up, session 1. I've then done a short session 2, and I've then done active recovery, which is my lunch. Then
So active recovery, if you were to assign an arbitrary number on that would that be anything below a 5?
Yeah.
Cool.
Below a 5 is like, in the gym, if you're below a 5, your estimated reps after that, you might be able to do 5, you might be able to do 6 or 7 or 8. Like, you don't really know. It's so far away. It's very hard to be accurate there. So yeah, below a 5 is an active recovery, really. Then yeah, so I got lunch. That's about an hour. Then I have washing up. Now I have washing up as another session because, like I say, sometimes washing up can be more or less. And this day, washing up was fairly low and fairly easy. So I actually have clean room with wash up. Clean room again is another 4 or 5, unless I'm doing like a deep clean. So I have 3 active recovery bits, like sessions in a 2-hour block. Then I have session 2 of the day, right? Session 2 of the day, I know I will start with a warm up. Now I don't have anything on my calendar as tasks to start the warm up, but just like when you turn up to football, rugby, trampoline, or whatever sport, you do a warm up. Why do you do a warm up in physical activity? To improve performance, not to prevent injury. Just caveat there for those that are listening, doesn't actually help. There's no negative research to say it increases likelihood of injury, but people tend to get injured in warm up. But so I would do a warm up. What does that warm up involve? Well, in physical activity, using the ramp protocol, raise, activate, mobilize, and potentiate. Well, we're not doing anything physical, so we don't need to raise our heart rate. We don't need to activate like our body. We don't need to mobilize our body either, unless we're doing something physical. But potentiation, we don't need to potentiate our activities up towards the energy expenditure of the skilled performance. But using running as an example, if you're going to go for a jog, your warm up might be, okay, I'll do a half hour walk, do a 1 or 2 minute walk, then a 1 or 2 minute slow jog for my half-hour run,
Mm.
right? So the warm-up for writing might be, oh, I'm going to read what I wrote last time. I'm going to write down some couple of things that I'd like to write about now. That to me is a warm-up. Then once you feel warmed up and ready, you then go into the session, and the session being the writing thing, whatever that entails.
So does that sometimes include kind of like just sitting there thinking about the ideas that you're writing? That would also be an example of a warm-up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
part of the warm-up. Yeah,
yeah.
because that would be the, again, depending on how intense the thinking gets. I know that sounds odd, intensity thinking, but
Mm, oh.
depending on how intense the thinking gets, the RPE may change.
Yeah.
And this is again where my session is fluid. If the RPE changes from a 4 or 5 to 6, 7, or 8, and the thinking, I'm like, oh, because thinking is writing. Now the session that was a 7 and 8 has started. So the warm-up of thinking has started the session. I'm
Mm.
not writing, but I'm
But you
thinking
are
about what.
thinking about what you're writing. Yeah.
So the experience is still energy like depleting. Like I'm still doing a lot of work towards the thinking. Whether
Mm.
that's goal related, that's where you'd want to address the session yourself and go, okay, is this where I want to be moving towards?
Mm. Which
How
is where your session has the note of writing this thing or writing about that thing or writing about that. The
exactly.
more specific your writing would you want the session to be, that's where your task assigned would be writing about this thing, writing about this, or
Yeah.
finishing this article, or finishing this post, or finishing this. Yeah.
So, for example, in a sporting context, if you go up to the gym, you say, right, I'm going to do leg day today, and you start doing your warm up, and then halfway through some of your arm exercises, you start pushing your arm exercises. Wait, today's leg day. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Like that would be the correction or the question. Sometimes people may go, you know what? I'm not feeling leg day today. I'm actually going to continue doing my arms, push, pull, whatever.
Mm.
And you can do the same thing with your writing, right? Instead of
Mm.
doing writing, maybe you just do researching. But the way that I would then alter that on my calendar is change the name of the session from writing to researching.
And then you can see that, and that's a very light measurement, I suppose.
Yeah, it's an acknowledgement that you're attuning your session with the appropriate experience.
Yeah.
Because now you know you need to do that 7, 8 writing session again. And for me, when I look at my calendar, and go, oh, I should really be writing. Writing is a 7, 8. Do I have time in the rest of my week to do another 7 and 8 writing session? No, I should probably stop what I'm doing and refocus on getting words down
Yeah.
as a measurable metric. Yeah. And then after that 2 hour session, I then had another, I would call it a session, but it was more of an active recovery in like post. So I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be some work. I'm thinking it's going to be like a 6 or a 7. It turned out to be like a 3 or a 4, which was actually kind of handy. And that was logo design, me thinking about logo design. I thought I was going to be doing some work in the logo design, but it turned out, you know what, actually, I just had some of these ideas and I was going to go meet you like a couple of days later. So I thought, you know what, actually, I don't need to do any of this. Don't need to do this. I'll see what other people come up with. So the pre was 5, 6, maybe a 7, and the post was 3, 4. Which actually worked out because the level 1 course that I had in the evening, which was a long session from 5 till 9,
was a 10.
I expected it to be an 8 or a 9. And the energy that I put into it, I could classify as a 3 or a 4. But the frustration that I was getting out of it moved it to a 7 and 8. And I was half expecting my frustration to make me feel like it was hard work. That's me understanding my emotions and the expectations of the experiences.
Because that's the thing, isn't it? Because when you bring in the emotion, it's like, oh, well, if I just don't get emotional, then it won't be that intense. But actually, it is
Because
still,
energy,
yeah,
emotion.
yeah, exactly. So that emotion will oh, well, I need to calm down before I continue, otherwise I won't continue. Well, no, I am just frustrated. So that has turned this session into a 8 or 9 when it could have been a 3 or 4.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
then
that can be everything from like what you're doing, as in the activity of interactive, or even if it's just like family stuff. So like
Mhm.
you're talking to your family and a conversation happens and you get into a heated discussion, or you kind of have a longer discussion where you have to think more, that then think more. You know what I mean? Like the perceived exertion is actually much higher than you originally thought it would be.
that's it.
Yeah. And then so that brings that up to a 6 or a 7. And you're like, oh, I had another perceived exertion of like 8 or 9. I may have to move that to tomorrow because
Mm,
yikes, that was intense. Or from my perspective, I'm thinking like I have a coaching session. This is gonna be a light one where kind of we're gonna be doing things in the session. Because sometimes often that's the most useful period of
yeah.
time is where I am actually less coaching as in a
Hmm.
traditional way and more of a like, okay, cool, let's just work on this. Let's just move through this, and then as we go, if you have questions, we can add. That may be a lower rate of perceived exertion versus an intense session where we go deep on topics and subjects and stuff, and that might be a 9 or a 10.
Yep. And with the so cooldowns in physical activity are almost pointless.
Yes.
They are almost
Yeah,
completely pointless. But psychologically, they can be useful in a transition. So
mm-hmm.
I don't like the term cooldown because of all the associated ideas around cooldown, but I do like an active recovery.
Yeah.
So at the end of each of my sessions, as you probably will have noticed, I have an active recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So in in the level one, I have the session,
Mm-hmm.
but that actually covers dinner because I had
Yeah.
to, right, because of times. So after that session, I have my active recovery. But throughout the day, I've had lunch as an active recovery. I had a small active recovery with the logo design before between session 2 and session 3. But at the end of my day, I always have active recovery, which is social. For me, that's going down watching TV with family. So if I was to look very broadly, zoom out at my day, I've got warm up, session 1. I then have a light session 2. I then have active recovery. I then have another active recovery session, which could become a session depending on what happens throughout the day. Then I have session 2, like main session 2. This day it happened to be a session 3. Then I have an active recovery, and then a transition into session 4. In this day, it happened to be an active recovery rather than a session 4. And then I will have normally my active recovery for dinner, and then my long active recovery in the evening. But this day I had a session 5,
Mhm.
and then I had an active recovery in the evening, and that encompassed dinner.
Cool.
So,
Yeah.
so throughout the day, I'm hovering between 7-8 down to 3-4, 7-8 down to 3-4. I know if I do 7-8, 7-8, 7-8, I'm going to be wiped out, so I'm not going to be able to do anything in the afternoon. And that's what I think a lot of people tend to do when they're like, I'm a
Yeah.
morning person, I'm an evening person. They have like two sessions or 3 sessions back to back that's 7 and 8, and they're wiped out because they've got no energy left. They need to recover.
Yeah. And so it's about, and that's often when I'm talking to people who want to work, who need to work with me, they're like, I need to be more um sustain. I want to sustain my activity. I want to be able to do more throughout the day. And I'm like, cool, then you need to do, then we need to spread it out because you're probably working at a 7 or an 8 most of the time. And then by the afternoon, you need to recover.
Yeah. I guess if you
How?
think of the day as a
Yeah.
run, right? If you run at a sprint, you will run out of energy. If you
Mhm.
go at a jog, you'll do it, but you won't be very fast. But if you do a sprint, then a jog, then a sprint, then a jog, then a sprint, then a jog, you're getting fast stuff done. You're getting stuff done effectively, but then you got rest and recovery. And that's how my day is. And I do exactly the same with the week. So I know some days are 7, 8 days, some days are 9 days, some
I
days
was
are five,
thinking
six
that
days.
because from my perspective, I'm like I'm looking at when I'm running D&D, they are always 9 days because yeah, I'm out for a number of hours. I'm running a session. There's a lot of improvisation. There's a lot of thinking on the fly. Like I am usually at an 8 or a 9 when I'm running D&D, when I'm running the session because it's a lot.
Yeah.
Some days it's not. Some days it's a 6 or 7. If my group just decide to talk about whether druids should be vegan or not, then it's just a 6 or a 7. And I'm like, cool, I can do stuff in the evening. But yeah, most of the time it's an 8 or a 9.
Yeah. I mean, as a moving forwards, talking about yesterday, the the day I had a session in the morning at trampoline center, And then it was meant to be drive, train, drive. And I thought the training would be the extensive effort, but the drive was horrible because I got stuck in so much congestion. So instead of a 2.5 hour trampoline training session, I had an hour, which is what we discussed previously. And I was in the car for, instead of 4.5 to 5 hours, almost 7. Yeah, almost 7 hours and it was a very hot day. So
And that right there, like yesterday for my own thing, you left me in the morning, and then I was like, oh cool, I'm gonna get all these things done. I had a number of things I had planned. I was like, I'm gonna finish some writing, I'm gonna do a little bit. I spoke to you about it, plan some D&D, but actually it was so hot, like that it was very quick to tell that my that just sitting in here for an hour was not a 4 or a 5. It was an 8 or a 9. And so I had tried to batch it all together and shove it all together to get it all done. And then I just completely wiped out for the rest of the day,
but that's
which is
that's where
often,
that's where for me, if the environment shifts, working at a so if I wanted to work at a 7,
yeah,
and normally if I sit down, it's like a 2, and then it's really hot, so now it's a 5, I can
yeah.
still work at a 7. I can still
But it's
work at a
just slightly
7,
different. Yeah.
but the work looks different because
Mm,
the load is split across the environment and the organism environment relationship. So, because the environment is requiring more energy, the organism expending energy to hit to a at 7 is now different. It looks different. That's where when you go to the gym, you're having a shit day. Instead of lifting 90 at 7, you're lifting 85 at 7
mm,
instead of the absolute numbers. So instead of the amount of words you would write, you'd reduce the words, but you're still at a 7. So I went to training and I did training, but my at a 7 training was a couple of singles here and there, not at 7 training doing some doubles.
mm,
So I adjusted the training to appropriate to make it at 7, not I'm still going to do my doubles and then train at 9 and like sweat every piece of water out of my body and then drive home. No, bad idea, bad plan. And I know today, because I'm coaching after this, I know obviously we had the double recording today, and I know I'm coaching later, so I know I need an active recovery in the middle.
which is exactly what you do.
Yeah, lunch. And then
Nice.
because I had an extensive day yesterday, I'm gonna say no to the stuff later.
Yeah. That's really helpful. It's really interesting because it is so simple and we sort of do it, but there is that perceived like, oh, we must like a 7 and an 8 is the same all the time. When I think that last little bit there of like it being adjusted and having to adjust it on the fly and being okay with that, like because the common assumption is you have to reach. I must be at a 7 or 8 all the time, otherwise I'm failing. But then when you're at a 7 and an 8 all the time, you need more active recovery and you're wiping yourself out, which means you can't be at a 7 or 8 versus like a 7 and 8 is a fixed thing versus it being a very fluid, very depending on what's happening thing,
Yep.
which is cool.
I mean, this is very it's very common to get RPE confused with absolute value numbers, and people do it in the strength and conditioning world as well. But it's so much easier
Mm.
to use RPE when you're familiar with using it, because then you don't need the numbers. Like I don't use numbers anymore. I know roughly what the numbers are, but I go in with a feeling, and that again is it's more accurate to the explanation of my experience,
Yeah,
right?
it's not a number, it's a feeling.
Precisely.
And we can all, the feeling bit is easier because we can all feel. Funny that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we can relate to that. Like
Mm,
if I were tomorrow was to say to you, oh yeah, I felt my training session was at an 8, but I planned for it to be at a 7. That makes sense to you.
mm.
But if I don't use the numbers, oh, yesterday's session was hard. You know it's difficult, but you don't know how difficult it was.
Yeah, how difficult and what, yeah. Mm,
So from a coaching perspective, using RPE is useful.
mm.
But when you're talking about it, you're like, oh, yesterday's session was hard. Hard in comparison to what?
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's using natural language, explanations of experiences, because that's what it is, but it's adding just a little bit of a measure on there to make comparison for fatigue levels and for training planning a little bit easier.
So there is that like 10, which is the max, and that's the thing. That sounds like the thing to get it started is like to test your 10, would you say?
Normally,
Yeah.
normally in sports context, you would try and do a 10
Yeah.
because it helps you understand where your actual limits are.
Yeah.
Like if you don't do any tests to know where your limits are, then you're guessing, oh yeah, this is a
That's what
five
I
and
thought.
six, where actually it's like a two, and you're just underestimating
Yeah.
yourself.
So it's
Yeah.
useful to, so for example, in this in the context of like sessions, you would do a session that would be an intense X amount of time session where you are working like
Mm.
you want to wipe yourself out. You want to finish the day, which is often what most of thinking about it from my perspective, I every time I'm working as hard as I can, which is a 10.
Yeah. If you're working as hard
Ah,
as you can for as long as you can, that's a 10. And when you do a 10, you need to recover, which is normally the next day going, yeah, I ain't doing that shit. And if you do manage to do a 10 and you push yourself and you go 10 and then 10 and 10, you know what your body does? It shouts, fuck off, and then you burn out.
yeah. Yeah. I like that.
But if you periodize yourself, you can do loads of work and it looks like you're going to burn out, but you're not because you've got active recovery. I know I've shown you the graph before, haven't I, about overtraining,
Yes.
non-functional, functional, overreaching. Yeah, that's how I train. That is how I practice using non-functional and functional overreaching.
Nice.
Avoid burnout, avoid overtraining, get loads of shit done and improve in the process. Drop mic. All right. Anything else you want to add?
No, that's good. That's really helpful.
Good. Glad it was. Speak to you all next week. All right.